Have you ever thought about what it'd be like to be technically perfect at something, but still feel like a complete and utter failure? Well, that's the gut punch of a question at the very core of Robert Browning's poem, Andrea del Sarto. Today, we're going to dive deep into the story of a real Renaissance artist whose perfect hands were at war with a soul that was desperate for something more.
This one line, man, it just captures the entire conflict of the poem, doesn't it? It's all about that agonizing space between what we can actually do and what we dream of doing. It's a timeless struggle, right? Ambition versus reality. And for our artist, Andrea del Sarto, it was pretty much a source of constant pain.
All right, so let's meet the man himself. We're stepping right into his studio in Florence. And the whole poem is basically one long, really intimate conversation. Browning uses this form called a dramatic monologue, which means we're essentially a fly on the wall, listening in on one side of a very personal chat, and we get this incredibly deep look inside the mind of the person speaking.
So, picture this. Twilight is settling over Florence, that beautiful golden hour light. The workday is over, and the artist, Andrea del Sarto, he turns to his wife, the beautiful Lucrezia, and he's just trying to find a quiet moment with her, to try and close a gap between them that feels like it's a mile wide.
You can just hear the exhaustion in his voice right away, can't you? A real sense of longing. He's pleading for a ceasefire. And that one line, it sets this really fragile, gentle tone. It tells you that, for him, connection isn't something that comes easy. It's something he actually has to beg for.
So, who was this guy? Well, Andrea del Sarto was a real person, a real artist. And get this, his nickname was literally the Faultless Painter. His technique, flawless. His composition, perfect. By every measure, he was a master of his craft. And yet, he never quite hit that rock star status of guys like Michelangelo or Raphael.
And that brings us to the central problem of the whole poem, the real paradox of his talent. See, Andrea knows he's brilliant, technically, but he also feels this profound emptiness when he looks at his own work. He feels like all that perfection is missing a soul. And that's where the real agony kicks in.
And this is the question that just haunts him. What good is having a perfect hand if there's no soul behind it, no part of you reaching for something bigger, for the heavens? This is the massive artistic crisis he's wrestling with right in front of Lucrezia.
Now, what's so interesting here is how Andrea himself breaks down the problem. He looks at his own art and he just sees a common grayness. It's perfect, yeah, but it's safe. It's kind of flat. But then he looks at the work of artists like Raphael. He can see their mistakes, their technical flaws, but through those imperfections, he sees something divine. He sees a truer light of God. They were reaching for something they couldn't quite grasp, and that flawed attempt was way more powerful than his own perfect, flawless work.
So, this is the crucial part. Andrea sees his own perfection as a curse. He actually exclaims, "the worse." For him, the fact that there was no struggle, no grand spiritual ambition, well, it made his art lifeless, no matter how beautiful it looked on the surface. I mean, what a devastating way to see your own life's work.
So you've got to ask, where did it all go wrong for him? In his mind, the answer is sitting right there next to him in the fading light. The poem shifts focus now to his wife, Lucrezia, who he sees as both his greatest inspiration and, well, the very source of his failure.
I mean, she is the sun that his entire world orbits around. You see her face over and over again in his paintings. She is his ultimate muse, the inspiration for all that earthly beauty that he creates with his perfect hands.
You can just hear it in that line, right? There's deep love there, for sure, but there's also a real possessiveness. She is his. His whole world is built around her beauty and just having her there. He's dedicated his life to her.
But that devotion, well, it came with a hefty price tag. As he keeps talking, Andrea starts to suggest that his intense focus on her, on their comfortable, grounded life, is the very thing that clipped the wings of his artistic soul.
And here's where his inner turmoil just becomes so painfully clear. He blames her, but in this tragic, almost loving way. He's imagining that if only she had wanted greatness too, if she had pushed him toward the heavens instead of toward comfort, they could have become legends together. He was looking for her to give him the soul his art was missing, and she never did.
And this isn't just some vague feeling he has. It's rooted in a very specific, life-changing decision. I mean, look at this timeline. His career was taking off. He was in France, honored by the king himself, entrusted with a huge responsibility. But then came the betrayal. Lucrezia wanted him back in Florence, so he took the king's money and used it to build her a house. It completely shattered his reputation. And now? Now he's stuck, secretly painting quick jobs to pay off the gambling debts of her friends. It's a huge fall from grace.
And so that brings us to the poem's very somber ending. As the evening gets darker and darker around them, Andrea seems to finally just let go of those huge ambitions, resigning himself to the life that he's chosen.
The whole mood just becomes resigned. All the fight seems to have just drained out of him. He knows the choices he made, and he's living with the consequences. He is the faultless painter, sure, but he knows he'll never be one of the greats.
He finds these little hollow victories in his own skill, pointing out that other artists can't draw an arm as perfectly as he can. But in the end, his art has just been boiled down to a transaction. He finishes the painting, he gets paid, and he shuts the money away. It's just a trade now, not a calling from God.
And just as he's sinking into this quiet despair, the outside world comes crashing in, shattering that intimate moment he was so desperate to have. It's a sound from the street just below his window.
This is the final devastating blow. The cousin, that's Lucrezia's lover, and Andrea knows it. That whistle is a signal for her. And with this quiet, just heartbreaking resignation, he sends his wife, his muse, the woman he sacrificed everything for, to another man. It's the ultimate symbol of him just passively accepting a life and an art that fell so far short of greatness.
And so we're left with that question, aren't we? Andrea del Sarto, he chose comfort, he chose love, he chose perfect craftsmanship, but he lost his soul's ambition along the way. Browning just leaves us there to wonder, is it better to create perfect, beautiful things right here on Earth, or is it better to fail while you're reaching for something divine?
Okay, so picture this. We're in Renaissance Florence, just as the sun is setting. The day is winding down, and we're with a master painter, a guy whose technical skill is, well, the envy of everyone. He can paint an arm, a face, anything, and it's flawless, every single time. But as we're about to see, there's a huge flaw hiding in all that perfection. And this is really the heart of Robert Browning's poem. It's such a powerful idea, right? That real greatness isn't about hitting easy targets. It's about that glorious, messy, beautiful struggle for something that's just out of reach. It's the reaching that matters, not the grasping. So that begs the question, the big paradox we're digging into today. What happens if you're so good, you never have to struggle? What if your grasp is already perfect? Well, that's the story of Andrea del Sarto, a man they literally called the faultless painter. And it's about the deep, deep flaw that was hidden in that very faultlessness.
All right, let's dive into our first section, the faultless painter's flaw. We're going to explore this agonizing gap between Andrea's perfect hands and what he feels is his empty soul.
So here's the paradox in a nutshell. On one side, you've got Andrea del Sarto. Technically, he's perfect. He literally never makes a mistake. But then he looks at the work of his rivals, guys like Raphael and Michelangelo, and he sees their flaws, an arm that's not quite right, a detail that's a little off. But their flawed work has this fire, this divine soul that makes people feel something profound. His perfect work, it's just perfect. He can grasp everything he wants, so he never actually has to reach for heaven. So now let's move on to A. Silver and Gray's soul, because to really get a handle on his failure, we have to listen to how Andrea explains it to himself. His monologue is honestly a masterclass in self-deception, and it shows us the themes that color his whole world. To really understand Andrea, you have to get this one key idea: rationalization. You know that voice in your head that says, "Oh, I didn't fail the test because I didn't study. I failed because the teacher hates me." Yeah, that's rationalization. And Andrea, well, he is the absolute king of it. His whole speech is just one long, beautiful excuse. And his first and his absolute favorite target is his wife, Lucrezia. He basically tells her, look, this is your fault. If you had just been a better muse, if you'd given me a soul, I could have been as great as Raphael. He just completely shifts the entire weight of his own artistic failure right onto her shoulders. And when blaming his wife isn't quite cutting it, he blames the universe itself. He suggests he's just a victim of fate. He insists he never had a choice, that God basically chained him to this mediocre life. You notice the pattern? The one person he never, ever points the finger at is himself. He's a victim of his wife, a victim of God, a victim of literally anything but his own choices. And this chart just illustrates the world he's chosen so perfectly. The poem's imagery paints his life in these shades of silver and gray, the colors of twilight, of safety, of things fading away. But whenever he thinks of the great masters or that time he worked for the French king, the colors explode into gold and fire, symbols of passion, of genius, and yeah, even of danger. He's chosen to live in the gray, but man, does he dream of the gold. So up to this point, we've only really heard Andrea's side of things. And you have to admit, he's built a pretty convincing case for being a victim. But should we actually believe him? Is he telling us the whole truth, or is he just telling us the version of the truth that he can live with? All right, next section, through the critic's eyes. To answer that question, we got to step outside of Andrea's head for a minute. Let's try on a few different pairs of critical glasses and see what his story looks like when we apply some modern theories. And these three perspectives just completely tear Andrea's whole story apart. A feminist lens is going to take a hard look at his wife, Lucrezia. A psychoanalytic lens is going to focus on the guilt he's so desperately trying to hide. And a Marxist lens, it sees his art not as some spiritual calling, but as a simple product for sale. So first up, the feminist lens. From this angle, Lucrezia isn't some soul-crushing monster. She's a scapegoat for Andrea's own lack of ambition. Their marriage feels totally transactional. Her beauty is her only real currency. And her silence? That's not weakness. It's the bored indifference of a woman who knows her husband is just desperate for an approval she has zero interest in giving. In a weird way, her silence gives her all the power. Okay, now let's swap those glasses for a psychoanalytic pair. The focus shifts to all those excuses he keeps making. Why does he need so many? Well, maybe it's because he's hiding some kind of crushing guilt. And it turns out he is. The poem reveals that he was given a pile of money by his patron, the King of France, to buy art, but he stole it. He used it to build a house for Lucretia. So his excuses aren't just about his artistic soul, they're a defense mechanism to hide the fact that he's a thief. This lens also suggests that maybe he's actually afraid of success, and he chose the safe, gray life because the fiery, golden life of a genius is just too scary. And finally, the Marxist lens just zooms all the way out and says, let's follow the money. For Andrea, at this point, art isn't about heaven or the soul anymore. It's a commodity. He's painting pictures to pay off the gambling debts of his wife's cousin, who, is pretty clearly her lover. He walked away from the golden world of royal patronage to do petty commercial work. From this point of view, his tragedy isn't spiritual, it's economic. He's an artist being crushed by the simple, brutal need for cash. So let's get to our final section, grasping the truth. After looking through all these different lenses, it's pretty clear that Andrea's story is way more complicated than he wants us to believe. But that brings up a really important question. Where did the poet Robert Browning even get this story to begin with? Well, the source was a real 16th century biography by a guy named Giorgio Vasari. And what's really interesting is that Vasari's version tells the story exactly the way Andrea wants us to hear it. Vasari straight up blames Lucretia. He basically says she was this awful woman who single-handedly wrecked her husband's amazing career. But this is where Robert Browning's genius really shines. He takes Vasari's simple, one-sided story and he just turns it completely inside out. He uses this incredible form called a dramatic monologue, where we only hear from one character. This lets Andrea tell us Vasari's story, but as he does, we see all the holes in it. Browning masterfully shifts the blame away from the external, his wife, to the internal. The poem subtly proves that Lucretia isn't the cause of his failure. She's just the excuse for a flaw that was in Andrea's soul from the very beginning. And so here we are, right back where we started. But after everything we've unpacked, this line just hits differently, doesn't it? It's not just a pretty phrase anymore. It's a diagnosis. Andrea's tragedy isn't that he couldn't reach heaven. It's that he never really, truly tried. His grasp was just too comfortable, too easy, too perfect. And that's really the question the poem leaves us wrestling with. Was he a victim of fate and a difficult wife? Or was he the architect of his own comfortable, gray, and ultimately soulless world? Did he look at the fiery, dangerous, golden heaven of genius, and did he consciously choose the silver life instead?